Okay, well, thanks for having me here, comrades. Well, the first thing to be said is this is an incredibly big topic, and I'm not going to be able to, touch on a whole series of things, obviously. But I'll say first something very brief about the general need for a revolutionary party. But I primarily want to concentrate on, I think in some ways the most controversial question is about, well, what do we do today and that, and how should we organise? Well, briefly put, if you want to achieve the overthrow of capitalism and establish a social society of genuine human freedom, well, then building a mass democratic revolutionary party, is a prime objective, and that is vital to take things forward. And because the reality is, for the working class to have any hope of success against the enormous power of capital and its political supporters, the reformists and so on, they've got to initially cohere the most militant and politically advanced sections of the working class in a fighting force that can then attempt to win over the mass of the working class and the oppressed from their engagement in concrete political struggles, and combat the influence of the various reformist and liberal forces. Now, the tragic reality, of course, is that no such party exists anywhere in the world today. And the question becomes then, well, what can we do to do some things to attempt to bridge the gap between the reality of, a party of hundreds of thousands, or in probably case of America, millions, and what we have is small socialist groups of, 50, a few hundred, or at best a few thousand in the world today. Well, first thing I'll say is that there's no prescriptive formula. There's no blueprint. There's no shortcuts. The mass parties that revolutionary activists have built in the past had a great variety of origins and utilised a vast array of tactics and strategies to gain mass support. Secondly, much will depend on objective factors which are largely outside the control of socialists today. The level of class struggle and mass resistance, the divisions in the ruling class, the state of the economy, the strength of reformist forces, wars, revolutions in other countries, economic slumps, and so on. But of course, how socialists respond to these objective developments is vital. Having a clear assessment of the political climate, both at a broad international level and national level, and at a very local specific level in terms of the particular struggles and campaigns you're involved in, is vital if socialists are to position themselves correctly. Such an assessment of the political situation impacts how you pitch your arguments, where you utilise your forces, what expectations you can have for growth and influence. Now, there's been a plethora of arguments and debates over the last few decades about what sort of organisation socialists need today. And there's no way I'm going to be able to address all of those arguments. But the first thing to be said is that it's not sufficient for individual revolutionaries just to operate alone in the trade unions or in mass movements or in broad socialist parties in the vain hope that their individual activities will somehow come together in the longer run to lay the basis for a revolutionary party. Revolutionaries need now to be organised, even when they're just small forces, to assess political developments, to debate out strategy and tactics, to organise cohesive interventions, to engage in political education, and to recruit, train the next layer of revolutionaries. Now, exactly how any group of revolutionaries organised is a very concrete question, and that which I can't answer here in Australia for people in America, and it'll depend on a whole variety of factors: the size of the organisation, the level of political experience of the membership, your geographic spread, the political milieu you're attempting to operate in, and the level of struggle and radicalisation in society. But tied to that, it is necessary, I'd say, to have a realistic and grounded understanding of the nature of your own organisation. On the one hand, socialists need to avoid the pretentious nonsense that a group of a few hundred or even a few thousand is already the basis for a revolutionary party, or is in some sense the prototype of the future party. On the other hand, a small revolutionary organisation, unless it is absolutely minuscule in size, should not be simply a discussion group with no coherent lines of demarcation from other political currents on the left, reformists, Stalinists, anarchists, centrist forces, or whatever. A small revolutionary organisation needs to take itself seriously and fight for its ideas. It needs to combine active intervention in debates that are taking place in society, political struggles going on, but also put a serious emphasis on recruitment. It needs an active membership, and that demands a degree of political discipline in the organisation. Now, for a small organisation, its cohesion and discipline is going to be overwhelmingly, and needs to be overwhelmingly, based on open political argument, democratic debate, discussion, and so on, and political conviction, convincing people, not some mechanical set of rules or some sort of top-down authoritarian leadership. Though again, the nature of the discipline of revolutionary organisation is going to be a concrete question. At the moment, in the lead up to the state elections here in Australia, a Socialist Alternative has a real prospect of having one or two of its members elected to the state parliament. And clearly the organisation is going to demand a much higher level of discipline and control over their activities than the average new member. It needs to be emphasised as well that there are simply no shortcuts in terms of achieving mass influence. We can't predict exactly how a mass party will emerge in the future. New leftward moving political currents can emerge, that revolutionaries will be in a position to regroup with. Radical currents can develop in the trade unions or in particular oppressed communities or on the university campuses. We have no crystal ball in that regard. The most useful thing revolutionaries can do now is build an organised revolutionary current committed to a principled set of politics that is capable of positively and creatively relating to whatever opportunities and struggles that open up in the future. Now, one of the serious mistakes of and setbacks for socialists over the last couple of decades is that a number of organisations which emerged out of the radicalisation of the late 60s and early 70s had reached an impasse and began to look for shortcuts to break out and to supposedly achieve mass influence. They watered down, or in some cases effectively abandoned, revolutionary politics and looked to substitutes, whether it was broad parties on the lines of the Left Party in Germany or Syriza in Greece and so on, or alternatively, you saw in the case of the US, they tailed behind Bernie Sanders, or in Britain behind Jeremy Corbyn. These get-rich-quick schemes led nowhere. They took thousands, internationally, they took many thousands of socialists out of revolutionary politics. I should say a few things about our experience in Socialist Alternative here in Australia. We were formed as a small organisation in 1995 after we were expelled from the International Socialist Organisation here, the affiliate of the International Socialist Tendency. There were only about 70 or so of us at the time, and many of those members were demoralised and shattered by the experience inside the ISO. And, for the first few years, it was not easy going, particularly as we were overshadowed by, a number of larger socialist organisations as well. But a core group stuck it out and began to build something. We grew a combination of interventions, in particular struggles and campaigns that were going on, initially in the anti-globalisation movement, the anti-war movement against Iraq, later on the same-sex marriage movement, but also out of the campaigns on the university campuses. And as we that put us in a position to take a series of initiatives, of different caliber. We regrouped with another small revolutionary group, the Revolutionary Socialist Party, who came from a quite different political tradition. And more recently, over the last few years, we've been able to develop an electoral project, the Victorian Socialists, which is now easily the largest and most successful socialist electoral front in Australia for 40 years or more. And we're now in a position of being, by far the largest socialist organisation, revolutionary organisation in Australia. But still, hundreds of members are still small beer in the context of what we want to achieve, a party, a genuine mass party. A few general points I'll say from that, though, which may be of some use to comrades in the US. I think our growth has been underpinned by one, an emphasis on developing a realistic perspective and understanding of the political situation. We haven't been bullshitting ourselves. Secondly, a hard-headed assessment of our own forces and what they are capable of doing. Thirdly, and combining that with a real commitment to core revolutionary socialist politics. Fourthly, a very serious effort to educate all of our own membership in the broader traditions and debates in the revolutionary movement. An education for a purpose, for intervene, debate, argue, not some sort of academic obscure education. Fifthly, maintaining a serious level of activity and commitment of the membership as a whole. Now, as I said, these are very broad generalities, not some prescriptive formula. But I think, on that sort of generalities, we can at least have some hope of success. There are, of course, no guarantees in politics at all. But, we're at least here we feel we've allowed laid the basis for something for the future. And that the most important thing I think out of that is that it lays the basis, I think, to take the most of the opportunities which I think are going to open up, in the coming years for revolutionary socialism, given all the crises of world capitalism, and allow us to, to take, a variety of practical initiatives and so on to seize the moment. Hopefully that sort of general approach can enable, revolutionaries everywhere to play a small but necessary part in beginning to lay the basis for the revolutionary movement that can become a real factor in challenging the atrocities that capitalism heaps upon us today. And because we see so many challenges around us, so many atrocities as capitalism grinds us down. And so it's vital that we now set our task to building a core of an organisation, which is not the fundamental basis for a revolutionary party, but can play at least a small part in laying the basis for one. And I'll leave it there.
Thanks so much. Next we have Reed.
Thanks, comrades. It's important that people are here and are willing to at least entertain building a revolutionary party today. This is especially true of my comrades who shared a former organization of mine, the International Socialist Organization. It's important to say we went through trauma, especially in its dissolution and all that was unearthed. So if you're an old comrade from the ISO, or even if you're brand new, thank you for being here. I hope we can all share lessons together, both what not to do and what we can do now. If you're willing to learn from the mistakes and the harm to build something better, we're happy to have you. We need you. This is obvious from the world we've been living through the past 3 years. No matter how much baggage we still carry with us from past experiences, capitalist crisis carries on. Without a party, we've seen movements and political ideas flourish and then get trampled back into channels safe for the system. Hope turns to apathy, while global disaster and the need for an alternative still loom large. This talk is not about what happened to the ISO, but I'd be remiss if I at least didn't review the history. The organization, the largest on the revolutionary left at the time, promised more democracy than it ever really delivered. It demanded hard political and strategic agreement. But following a heated 2013 faction fight and the downturn and struggle post-Occupy, the the organization tightened even more. With the rise of Ocasio-Cortez and DSA, a split arose at the top of the organization. A section of national leadership worried about our irrelevancy and brittleness. With that split at the top, a path opened below. For the first time, healthy factions and tendencies formed. Unlike past pre-conventions heading into 2019, it felt we could actually shift the organization's activity together. While a section of the organization advocated support for democratic socialist election campaigns, the vast majority of the membership was grouped around the Independence and Struggle platform, which favored labor, social movements, and political independence, and the steering committee majority. At the 2019 convention, I saw the cadre finally unleashed. That also came with the reveal of the real harm years of top-down methods had done to members, especially comrades of color, trans comrades, and other members of specially oppressed groups. Coming out of the convention, we were a bit shaken, but hopeful that we had a fresh perspective and a new batch of national leaders. Sadly, that hope was shattered when a newly elected leader from the INS platform was exposed as having himself been a perpetrator of a sexual assault that others had covered up back in 2013. What little trust had remained in the organization and the organization itself then fell to dust. So what kind of party do we need? Let's start with what we do not need. One, we don't need a party that is too divided among itself to take decisive action when necessary. DSA is riven with divisions and an uneven political level across its paper and active membership. It tries to include everyone who vaguely calls themselves a socialist. Because of that, the DSA can largely only appeal to the lowest common denominator of activity. It can throw its organization behind left-wing Democratic Party politicians' campaigns, but not nationwide Black Lives Matter rebellions. It does not advance socialist consciousness, but tails its activity to those who still accept aspects of liberal capitalist ideology. At the same time, we also don't need a party that is so stifling, so hermetically sealed, so led from the top that it can't take input from the base of the organization. One that can't be educated as well as educate, that can't shift in the ways it needs to, and instead protects its apparatus above all else. In short, we need a party that can thread between the twin dangers Polish revolutionary Rosa Luxemburg talked about. In Reform or Revolution, she wrote, the revolutionary socialist movement must guide itself between two rocks, quote, abandoning the mass character of the party or abandoning its final aim, falling into bourgeois reformism or into sectarianism. Because our movement is a mass movement, and because the dangers menacing it are not derived from the human brain, but from social conditions, Marxist doctrine could not assure us in advance and once and for always against the anarchist and opportunist tendencies. The latter can be overcome only as we pass from the domain of theory to the domain of practice, but only with the help of the arms furnished us by Marx. In the aftermath of the ISO's collapse, I healed. Yes, through therapy, but also through study. I tried to understand why the ISO ended up as it did and how we could avoid its problems in the future. In doing so, I reached back, not just to the history of the ISO, but through the whole history of the modern American socialist movement. This whole 150-year history weighs upon us, as Marx said, as like a nightmare upon us living. While still incomplete, I believe this history provides insights into both what we need to unlearn from the past and the type of party we need to build in the future. One, building small organizations, propaganda groups, what some derisively refer to as microsects, are a necessary step in the accumulation of activists in the formation of larger movements and parties. Here's just one example. Albert Parsons, if you remember, was a Haymarket martyr and a key leader in socialist and anarchist movements of the 1870s and 80s. We talk about his involvement in the Chicago 8-hour day struggle, but we don't mention how he was first recruited to the socialist movement. For that, we can thank a flyer, 2 speeches, and 1 answered question at a small public meeting, all from the Social Democratic Working Men's Party of only 1,500 members. But though their work is essential, we can't see these propaganda groups as growing into a mass party through individual accumulation, nor should we hold these groups as too precious. The danger of falling into sectarian irrelevancy is real. We must be willing to shift from propaganda to agitation or regroup these propaganda organizations into a single project. Secondly, however, the problems of the sex in recent decades cannot be solved by parties so broad that they fall into opportunism or inaction. In fact, broad parties not only aren't a solution to sex, but historically birthed the worst authoritarian tendencies we blame sex for. In a revolutionary party, discipline should emerge from political unity. We agree to a set of revolutionary principles, a revolutionary program. We debate how to implement that program. Then, even if we disagree, ideally we have the confidence and trust we're all in this with the same goal and broad methods in mind to then carry out our democratic decisions, but still disagree if we need to. In a broad tent party, however, political unity isn't possible. Sometimes this means paralysis or horizontalism. In other words, everyone does whatever they individually want. But as action becomes necessary or when discipline needs to be imposed, only one tool is at the disposal of a broad party: the apparatus. The control over the party press and media, the party committees and official leadership, and other institutions in the party become key for imposing the will of one particular political grouping or another inside a broad party. We see this clearly with the Bowman-Palestine debacle inside DSA. The party leadership has used its institutional power to impose its discipline, rather than creating space for democratic debate and decision that might tear the organization apart. The same thing is played out in broad parties of years past. The Socialist Party of America of the early 20th century was split between the right wing of Victor Berger, the centrists of Morris Hillquit, and the left of Eugene Debs and the IWW. With the apparatus being the battleground, these different tendencies develop methods of faction gangs that are familiar with anyone who has faced the ire of a sect leadership. Different tendencies accuse one another of party treachery. Leading cliques use their power to prevent amendments to resolutions coming to the floor of conventions. The right-wing local New York Central Committee even tried to remove Big Bill Haywood from the party's National Executive Committee in the middle of the Lawrence textile strike, for Christ's sake. These lessons in faction gang apparatus politics got passed down into the future revolutionary parties and organizations. And it's very easy to see how. Benjamin Gitlow, James P. Cannon, John Reed, Jay Lovestone, Bertram Wolfe, Earl Browder, Charles Ruthenberg, all these future leaders of the American Communist Party were educated in factional warfare, first in the Socialist Party as members of its left wing. They faced the right wing blocking their convention resolutions. Their locals seceded from state organizations and factional disputes. Their comrades were expelled from the party under bad grounds. This faction gang approach continued into the Communist Party. Faction gangs use suspensions, expulsions, and their personal relations with Moscow to try to get a leg up on their competitions. There's even a story of Max Shachtman and one of the Dunn brothers barricading themselves in the offices of the Daily Worker against factional rivals. This practical education then combined with an official education provided by the bureaucratized Third International of Communist Parties, the Comintern. The Bolshevization, led by Gregor Zinoviev, turned non-Russian communist parties into monolithic ones. These new Bolshevized parties weren't modeled on the Bolshevik party that led the revolution, that held major debates in the party press on the questions of insurrection or Lenin's April theses. Instead, these monolithic parties were modeled on a fast bureaucratizing Russian party that had already banned factions and was rooting out Trotskyism. So methods of vicious factional warfare carried through the apparatus combined with a model of a monolithic party. All of this was part of our inheritance in the American socialist movement. Shachtman and Cannon brought these methods into the Trotskyist movement. Gitlow and Lovestone brought these methods into their short-lived splinter. And Foster and Browder likewise held tight control of the official Stalinist Communist Party through the apparatus and loyalty to Moscow. Yes, isolation played its part, especially for the tiny Trotskyist movement. But no matter how large or rooted our parties, when faction fights came up or political turns were necessary, these core lessons of apparatus politics and monolithism weighed us down.
10 minutes.
So how do we avoid the mistakes of the past? How do we move forward to build a party of the name? First, an honest recognition of past mistakes and inheritances is absolutely essential. We must be willing to reevaluate past practice, even from theoreticians and revolutionary activists we hold dear to our hearts. We must uncover the history that's been lost or kept from us. For example, in the ISO, we never learned that identity caucuses were common practice in our predecessor organization, the International Socialists. But just like what Rosa Luxemburg said about theory, a knowledge of history is no guarantee we can avoid the dangers of the past. We must take that knowledge of theory and history and pass to the realm of practice. Secondly, as part of that practice, we must develop a cadre, a layer of grassroots leaders up and down our organizations that can work together but also think for themselves. We had a cadre in the ISO, but that cadre disintegrated, has scattered to the winds. Even still, That cadre of the past was not independent enough. The cadre we build in a future party must look a bit different. They must have deep theoretical knowledge. They must be able to be engaged in debates across the left. They must be able to act coherently as one unit in the struggle. But they also must be able to buck their leaders when necessary. We want activists who can build organizations and struggles wherever they are and not be dependent upon a leader for answers. That also means being willing to make independent judgments and having democratic control of their organizations. The sexual assault case did destroy the ISO, but it was doomed when cadre members on the disciplinary committee failed to buck the leadership in 2013 as it interfered with the investigation. Cadre must be loyal to the politics, not the apparatus or leadership. Thirdly, the process of building a united cadre out of our scattered groups will take time. We need to forge political unity across our organizations, even if we can't achieve political unanimity, if ever. Even if the prospect of immediate fusion isn't on the table, we must establish practices of joint education and debate, joint activity and struggle, joint propaganda. The grooves of collaboration, of clarifying politics, of winning through argument and not apparatuses must be well worn as we look to regroup and ultimately build a mass revolutionary party. Fourthly, but the starting point for all of this is the building of local, regional, and national organizations. Organizations that are actively recruiting and training new revolutionaries, that can root ourselves in neighborhoods and workplaces around both hyper-local struggles and international issues. Whether you're just one person or already know a few comrades around you, it's time to start building where you are. 6 or 8 months after the ISO's dissolution, I started reaching out to comrades about organizing again. Most weren't ready or didn't want to organize with me or in general. Ultimately, the Boston Revolutionary Socialists were born from a core of just 3 of us from an ISO branch of some 30. It's taken us a lot of hard work, especially through a pandemic, but we've now have 2 small but growing branches. In the thankless work of building local organizations, we all need support. Being part of RSOP and the RSN have been essential. They, along with Tempest and Workers' Voice, can all assist in our efforts, and the BRS has different members in all of them. We're in a unique moment in the struggle for socialism. Radicalization is rampant, but political organization remains weak. We sit on the precipice of global annihilation, but we have years of work ahead of us. So let's put our heads together and figure out how we overcome the impasse. The future of our world depends on it.
Great, thanks.
All right, I'll give it a try. So I want to propose some answers to the organizational questions we're facing, but more than that, I want to invite those assembled here to commit to answering them together in the coming months and years. In case you missed it, that's what this whole conference is really about. What kind of party do we need? Or more specifically, what kind of party should revolutionaries be focused on building? Well, I want to say out of the gates, not a Labor Party, not a broad socialist party, and not an electorally focused party. Some think they already are the party we need, and all they need to do is gobble up the other pretenders to the throne. Anarchists and movementists reject the idea of party altogether. So do base builders and those drawn to building vague, quote, infrastructures of dissent, to use a phrase popularized by the overall great new book, Revolutionary Rehearsals in the Neoliberal Age. Both mistake tasks of the class for those of revolutionaries. As the ISO was collapsing, Hal Draper's critique of the microsect was set off like a bomb to finish the job. It vilified the fundamental Marxist approach of organizing around a shared politics of some specificity. Questions raised by the rape and abuse in the ISO, as well as by the pressures of opportunism, went beyond how to prevent such horrors in our organizations to whether we should organize on a political basis, whether we should enter a reformist socialist organization as scattered individuals, or whether we should organize at all. Many comrades came to question Leninist basics, as if Lenin himself covered up the rape. So it must be affirmed that we need a revolutionary socialist vanguard party. Its necessity derives from features of class society and human consciousness that remain unchanged since such a party was conceived and tested by the Bolsheviks. These features include the hegemony of bourgeois ideology, the uneven development of consciousness within the proletariat, the centralized power of the capitalist state, and the treacherous role of reformism. While vanguardism is widely misunderstood and misapplied, there is a truth at its core that is undeniable. Revolutionaries need a fighting formation to fight the ideas of the bourgeoisie, and eventually to fight the bourgeoisie and their lackeys quite literally. It is true that the level of struggle and class organization is low, and that there is no existing vanguard, and that we are not a party, but that does not relieve us of our responsibility to relate to and organize with the most politically conscious sections of our class. Class struggle can and should be advanced by organized socialist intervention. We must take a political lead. We must avoid lowering our politics to the lowest common denominator, but instead fight to raise the politics of others. We should not be ashamed to compete for influence in every fight we can get into. We don't know everything, but solid Marxist politics can illuminate every issue and turbocharge every fight back. We need a revolutionary organization dedicated to wielding the Marxist tool set for understanding and changing the world. It needs cadres trained in theory and action and developed enough politically to carry Marxist methods and arguments into every fight. It must be large, radically democratic, and represent all sections and identities of our class. It needs permanent persuaders, activist writers and activist speakers, a big, sexy profile, and a reputation as the best fighters. It needs vibrant publications that are subordinated to it, not the other way around. Today, there are thousands of Marxists and many more potential Marxists who don't know what to do. It is imperative for developed Marxists to get off the sidelines and into the fray, not just as movement activists, but as open Marxists actively working toward revolution. The current rise in interest in Marxism has been accompanied by a decline in Marxist organization. The crisis of Marxism in the US today is a crisis of organization. However, we cannot just snap our fingers and create it. Ultimately, we need a combat party fit for the task of seizing power. Such a party cannot be built in the absence of widespread radicalization and the organized intervention of Marxists. We have no control over the first condition, and we must dedicate ourselves to the second. We need national organization, but we also must organize locally in the meantime. Local groups can start as little more than study groups, study circles that go to protests together. These can form the basis to recruit and develop cadre through propaganda, political education, and social movement and labor activism. As the first step toward national organization, we need to create a framework for local groups to provide mutual support, clarify our ideas, and coordinate action. And we're currently trying to do this through the Revolutionary Socialist Network and the Revolutionary Socialist Organizing Project. What is the right level of political agreement for our current context? Some of the divisions between Marxists can be contained within a single organization. Others are too fundamental. An organization that is too narrowly defined will not attract enough members nor foster the vibrancy needed to develop self-confident, critical thinking cadre. Similarly, rather than fixating on crafting the perfect program for a particular movement, we should ask ourselves, what demands and approaches will get more people actively involved and provide a basis for further action? This is based on the idea that people learn best in struggle, not by being convinced of an abstract, overly detailed program. On the other hand, a revolutionary organization that papers over the issues that have rightly divided Bolsheviks from social democrats, Stalinists, Maoists, and anarchists only entangles itself in interminable debates and precludes effective activity. We need a coherent politics and methodology. The RSN and RSOP have each developed great points of unity that are fit for this moment. First and foremost, we uphold the Marxist principle of class independence. That leads us to consider the Democratic Party an impediment to class consciousness and class organization, not a path to it. We seek confrontation with the state, not capture of it. We orient on class struggle and rupture, not electoral gains and gradualism. We oppose all imperialisms and take the side of the international proletariat against their own ruling classes. We reject campism and the logic of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. We take an abolitionist stance on the police, military, prisons, and borders. In the fight against oppression, we connect it to the fight against exploitation while rejecting the twin pitfalls of class reductionism and separatism. We fight for socialism from below and will settle for nothing less than the self-emancipation of the working class. And we advocate for a revolutionary party to accomplish these tasks. In addition to political agreement, an effective revolutionary organization needs to agree on strategy. We need, quote, more than a mere collection of individuals giving general adherence to a platform, to quote Duncan Hallis, but a, quote, center for mutual training and debate, for raising the level of the raw activist to that of the experienced. We should seek every opportunity to demonstrate our politics in action. But until we build the capacity to lead major struggles, we must recruit primarily on the basis of our ideas. We're better off admitting that, as Mick Armstrong cautions in From Little Things, Big Things Grow. We need to go where the struggle is. We need to build on the rebellious elements in workers' consciousness and try to win the best fighters to a Marxist perspective. The forefront of class struggle today is in social movements, where people are coming into motion over political issues. The people most open to Marxism will be found in these movements. Eventually, we need to be implanted in strategic industries, but it is heightened struggle, not a few dozen artificially implanted socialists, that changes consciousness and provides an opening for our ideas. These perspectives were developed in concert with my closest comrades in the Denver Communists, Seattle Revolutionary Socialists, Boston and Central Ohio Revolutionary Socialists, the RSN and the RSOP. They come from years of discussion and our collected experiences, especially since the ISO collapsed, when we had to figure out how to proceed and what to keep and reject from our past. After the collapse of the ISO, to say a little more about the Denver Communists, the Denver branch refounded almost immediately as the Denver Communists on the same political basis we had been recruited to. We immediately adopted a guilty until proven innocent policy on accusations of sexual assault. And a core group of 6 of us remained, and we've since become a member, we've since built a membership of 25, though we have slipped back to 22 under Biden, that rat. We've been active in anti-racist, anti-fascist, immigrant rights, and other activism. But I'm proud to say that the center of our work has been political education via weekly meetings on revolutionary socialist theory, history, strategy, and tactics. We've managed to develop some political clarity and avoid getting lost in the swamp of reformism, eclecticism, movementism, mutual aidism, anti-organizationalism, and the last one is an ism, the romanticization of illegality. The siren song of the ballot box has fallen on deaf ears here. Nobody's around to tell us not to be so mean to social democrats anymore either.
10 minutes.
We present ourselves as brash, bold, loud, and proud Marxists, Leninists, and Trotskyists. Though coalition and campaign work can require a softer touch, we take unapologetically hard left positions without worrying too much about having mass appeal in this moment. We like to raise the red flag like a bat signal and see who responds. In the movement of the present, we must also represent and take care of the future of that movement. We basically have to build a locomotive while it is already hurtling down the tracks. We need to build a national organization while also building locally. We need to incubate locals across the country, reactivate our unorganized former org mates, and figure out how to integrate contacts from cities without locals that we make contact with, including in a meeting like this. I think we're caught in a predicament between build it and they will come and providing an opportunity for comrades to get in on the ground floor. It's why we helped found a network and an organizing project, and why we organized this conference and an anti-war coalition, is to take a step forward in terms of revolutionary organization while encouraging others to take the next step together with us.